What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is March 15th, 2019, getting into, the Ides of March. Beware the Ides of March here. And, of course, tomorrow's the anniversary of the death of Rachel Corrie in Israel. And, of course, Sunday is St. Patrick's Day, so got to be wearing the green for that. Anyway, we've got a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to put you on the air with your comments and questions. And, of course, this being Friday, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3. All right, obviously, the big news, everybody's talking about it, is the terrible tragedy down in Christchurch where these 49 worshippers were shot at 2 different mosques, and 7 died at Linwood, 41 at the mosque near Hagley Park. 4 people have been arrested, including 1 woman. And apparently one of the gunmen literally live streamed the shooting at the Al Noor Mosque. And this is the worst terror attack on New Zealand soil. Police Commissioner Mike Bush said the shootings were aberrant. Yes. And apparently one man in his late 20s has been charged with murder so far, and that appears to be this Australian, Brenton Tarrant. And right now, social media is scrambling to just basically erase everything about this guy on social media. Including his manifesto, which apparently he posted a few hours before he and these other 3 who've been arrested did whatever it is that they did. So it's an ugly, ugly situation. And everybody is already scrambling to warp it to their particular agenda. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez basically came on out mocking the mosque goers, saying, what good are your prayers? You know, prayers can't stop bullets. And of course, that triggered a huge backlash. It was an ill-advised message. And so Ocasio-Cortez is out there making jokes about it. Then she turns around and says, you know, this is really all the fault of the American National Rifle Association. Really, it's all their fault here. Now, as it turns out, the reason for the disparity, why there were so many at one mosque and only 7 at the other, is that apparently there was an armed man who fired in self-defense. Now, there's one story that he just had the gun. There's another story that he literally tackled the shooter and wrested the shooter's gun away from him and chased him off. So there's definitely a hero down there. But again, it illustrates the only way you stop a bad person with a gun is to have a good person with a gun. And apparently the story is that the good guy with a gun was a well-known Muslim local. And according to the story I'm looking at, apparently he had a rifle or a shotgun. And he chased the shooters, interesting, it's plural, fired 2 shots at them as they sped off. So we're being told there's only 1 shooter, but the early reports are there was more than 1, and of course they arrested 4 people. Now, Donald Trump just the other day did one of the stupidest things he's ever done. And he was out there saying that he has the support of the police, the support of the military, the support of the bikers for Trump. I've got tough people, but they don't play it tough until they go to a certain point, and then it would be very, very bad. And apparently he said that more than once, and it's one of the dumbest things Trump could have done. First of all, because he lowered himself down to the same level as Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and liberals in general. And second, because of the unfortunate timing with this mosque shooting in New Zealand, he's opened himself up, and everybody's trying to say, well, see, it's his fault. He's encouraging violence. So over on CNN, they had Intercept columnist Mehdi Hassan claiming that far-right terrorism is on the rise and it's all the fault of President Trump because he's encouraging all of this stuff. Piers Morgan came on out and said 49 massacred innocent Muslims prove words can have lethal consequences, Mr. President. If you don't ferociously disown the racist lunatics claiming to be inspired by you, you'll be damned by your silence. So, again, everybody's using this incident for their own agendas here. And again, I have to wonder, what's going on with Donald Trump? He tweeted out best wishes to the New Zealand shooting victims. This is a tragedy. It's not a wedding. Okay. All right. So anyway, Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang has some dramatic fears about the future of race relations. And he's out there, he's running for president, and he says that insecure white majority may begin shooting up a bunch of Asians as they lose power. So they're playing the race card on that one. Okay, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And over in Israel, as expected, in response to those 2 rockets that were fired toward Tel Aviv, the IDF pounded Gaza, just hauled off on them. And the bombardment was so intense that Palestinians have actually called off this week's chapter, if you will, of the Great March of Return. Because obviously there's a lot of rapidly moving metal objects in the air, and they want to be careful. The National Authority for the March of Return is saying this was an effort to maintain calm in the Strip and prevent escalations after Israeli occupation forces bombed 100 sites in the besieged enclave overnight, injuring 4 Palestinians. Okay, so here's what's really interesting. Normally, Palestinian resistance groups in Gaza are quick to claim credit for actions they take against Israel. But in this case, they're all saying, no, it wasn't us. We don't know who it was. We don't know where it came from. And it raises the possibility, and given Israel's history, it's a real one, that these 2 missiles fired towards Tel Aviv were an Israeli false flag so that Netanyahu could start a bloody war against Gaza as part of his political campaign. As you know, Israel expelled the TIPH observer group from Hebron last month, and a group of Palestinian activists from the city formed their own team of observers to fill in the gaps, and they're saying that Palestinian human rights are definitely under attack. The situation is deteriorating over there. Yet again, 150 settlers have stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque, escorted by a heavy police presence, and this was all organized from extremist settler organizations to enter the mosque. All right. And apparently extremist organizations call on settlers to invade the mosque under the slogan, "Together we prevent the Muslims from taking control of the Bab al-Rahma." That's one of the gates there, was recently chained by Israeli authorities, reopened by Palestinians in the midst of heavy arrests and violent confrontations. Now, Netanyahu may be in a little bit more trouble because Israel's Attorney General is now opening a new case that would connect Prime Minister Netanyahu and Case 3000, also known as the submarine affair. This is a lot more serious than the little quid pro quo with the newspaper. The case involves allegations that top government and defense officials abused their power to skim off large sums of money from transactions between Israel and German company ThyssenKrupp for the purchase of nuclear submarines. Now, as you know, Florida is advancing a bill to shield Israel from criticism, and that's the bad news. The good news is over in Missouri, there's a bill introduced in their legislature that affirms boycotts are protected political expression under the First Amendment. And the measure was sponsored by progressive lawmaker Brandon Ellington, saying that criticism of a nation by individuals, including as a nonviolent citizens boycott, does not constitute bigotry against the citizens of that nation, which is exactly what I've been saying all along. So the bill upholds the constitutional right to boycott any entity when people have conscientious concerns with the entity's policies or actions, adding that the state should not punish individuals for supporting boycotts by denying them contracts. So there's a little bit of a pushback there. Over in Venezuela, it's come on out basically that Juan Guaido and his right-wing economic advisors have drafted plans to privatize Venezuela's state-owned oil industry and open up the oil-rich country to foreign corporations. So again, it's all about the oil. Go on in, privatize the oil company, open it up, let foreign corporations come on in and make the money off of Venezuela's oil. So this is coming out of Reuters. Now, the privatization scheme will be difficult to implement given that the Venezuelan government still remains under the control of its elected president, Nicolas Maduro, and the coup led by the Trump administration so far has kind of done a faceplant. Okay. The Gray Zone reported on the opposition's moves to try to privatize Venezuela's oil industry immediately after the coup attempt began nearly 2 months ago, at a time when corporate media outlets were largely ignoring this key detail and instead portraying the conflict as a supposed humanitarian crisis. Meanwhile, Juan Guaido was out there saying, it's a fallacy to think that Russia and China support Maduro. No, absolutely not. It's just silly. He's trying, it's an isolation ploy. He's saying Maduro's government do not have any international allies. It is not true that Russia and China are with them. That's a great fallacy. Nobody is with them. It feels to me like he's in thrash mode, to be very honest here. Okay, now up at the United Nations, they were having this meeting on the drug problem, the global drug problem. And as Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreza began to address the chamber, the U.S. delegation stormed out, claiming that the officials representing the Maduro government are illegitimate. Now, that was an important issue to be talking about there, the international drug crisis. But no, we got to score points. We got to stick our finger in Maduro's eye just one more time. Now, dealing with Venezuela's blackout, there are conflicting stories. Some sources are saying it's still totally blacked out. Others are saying about 80% of the power is back on. But there was an interesting little story that came out over at Zero Hedge, where somebody was revealing that the State Department attempted to bribe a technician in Iran to disable Tehran's power grid. They offered him $250,000, and all he would have to do is go to a specific location in the Tehran area with a computer and punch in a code. So blacking out power systems, that is part of how the game gets played. All right, the United States, of course, has come out with the annual Human Rights Report, which bashes all of the U.S. current enemies. A high-ranking member of the Palestine Liberation Organization says that the U.S. decision to drop using the phrase Israeli occupied from the Golan Heights, Palestinian territories, is meant to whitewash the Israeli occupation and human rights violations in the nation. And the report also decontextualizes the reality by omitting the inescapable fact of Israeli occupation of Palestine. Now, Tehran has also rejected Washington's allegations in the Human Rights Report, saying the report is untrue, politically motivated, saying that Washington has turned into the biggest violator of the Iranian people's human rights by slapping the nation with unlawful economic sanctions. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Bahram Qassami was referring to the so-called country reports on human rights practices for 2018, in which the U.S. State Department has once again leveled a host of unfounded accusations of rights abuses against a number of countries, including China. This latest report is complaining China's human rights abuses akin to Stalin and Hitler. So furious Chinese officials responded by accusing the United States of prejudice and a Cold War mentality. Boy, they got that one right. Okay, a while ago, there was a story that originated in the World Israel News, I think it was, and it was picked up by a lot of people. And the headline read, Syria notifies Israel it will attack if IDF doesn't leave Golan Heights. And I questioned the story at the time because it seemed out of character for Assad and looked like it might be a prelude to a false flag to justify war in the Golan. Well, my lovely wife Claire took it upon herself to actually get in touch with somebody at the United Nations who says there's no confirmation for it. It appears nowhere else other than that one original source where it was picked up from, and that as far as they can tell, Assad made no such provocative statement whatsoever. Meanwhile, Russian warplanes are raining heck on Idlib. Warplanes of the Russian Aerospace Forces delivered a series of airstrikes on the infrastructure of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in the city of Idlib and in its southeastern countryside. According to reports, at least 16 strikes hit weapons depots, headquarters, and a jail belonging to the terrorist group. Opposition sources said that hundreds of prisoners managed to escape the prison after the airstrikes. So it's still going on over there. The United States is announcing more support for the heroic white helmets in Syria, who are not very heroic. They have been caught faking many of these chemical weapons attacks that are being blamed on Assad. But the United States is sending them another $5 million to keep them going. And so despite Trump's comments of just a few weeks ago, no, the United States is not getting out of Syria. Meanwhile, Russia is reinforcing its air group in Syria with 3 Sukhoi 25 warplanes. Now, the Sukhoi 25 Grach is a single-seat, twin-engine, close air support warplane. Was actually developed all the way back when the Soviet Union was still in business. But it's been upgraded, and the latest upgrade, the Sukhoi 25 SM-3, is equipped with the Advanced Tactical Electronic Warfare Suite Weitspik 25, the SOLT 25 day-night electro-optical targeting systems, a new encrypted communication systems, and updated navigation. And this type of warplane was deployed to the Hmeimim Air Base several times since 2015 to provide the Syrian Arab Army with close air support here. And here is a big whoopsie. Up in Afghanistan, American warplanes obliterated an allied Afghan military post. Now, the U.S. initially said it was self-defense. They were firing on us, but then they found out it was their own guys. Now, the incident is under investigation to find out just what happened. But the U.S. mission spokesman appeared to excuse all of this by saying, we're operating in a complex environment where enemy fighters do not wear uniforms and use stolen military vehicles. But they still bomb their own people. Over in Yemen, hundreds have hit Sana'a streets after women and children were killed in airstrikes in the northern province of Hajjaj earlier this week. So much war going on here. All right, the International Criminal Court is starting an investigation into war crimes in all of these war areas, and the U.S., of course, does not want to have that happen. And so they've decided they're simply not going to issue visas to any individuals who are behind any of the ICC investigations of U.S. personnel. This came from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and basically saying they'll deter ICC efforts to pursue any allied personnel, including Israelis. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And once again, I'm standing here with my little collection plate in the hand here, asking for everybody listening to this show to step up and support independent media. You can see what's going on right now. We're being just bum rushed into yet another war, and yet another economic disaster, and independent media is under attack. They're going after our advertisers, they're deplatforming us, they're trying to silence us, both to protect the war agenda and heading into 2020. And we need your help. I can't put it any plainer than that. And this is not funny, and I'm not trying to be humorous or anything like that. This is really serious. This month is really tight for Republic Broadcasting Network and for whatreallyhappened.com. So please think about maybe put just a few dollars in an envelope, okay? And send it to Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. And the network thanks you, and I thank you. We're just getting by. If we fall silent, the bad guys win. All right. So we're talking about the story where Mike Pompeo has basically said that the U.S. is simply not going to issue visas to any individuals who are involved with the International Criminal Court investigations of U.S. personnel, their allies, or Israelis. In other words, they are simply blocking the entry of investigators. Now, the ICC is saying they're going to continue their investigations anyway, despite this encumbrance. But I mean, Mike Pompeo basically just glued a neon sign to his forehead that is flashing guilty, 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 guilty. Over in Crimea, Russia's getting ready to launch 2 new power stations to mark the 5th anniversary of reunification. And the power stations are going to be in Simferopol and Sevastopol. They were built by Russia's state-run conglomerate Rosneft. They're going to be launched on March 18th, Monday. And Putin himself may actually show up for the opening. So good for Russia, good for Crimea. Over in North Korea, things are not going very well. Reports are saying that Kim Jong-un is thinking about just trying to call off any effort to have any kind of talks with the United States because of the attitude displayed by Donald Trump at the last summit. And they're describing Pompeo and Bolton as gangster-like. So North Korea may just call off the talks with the U.S. and renew their missile and nuclear tests. Trump was this close to making it work. All he had to do was give a little back, and it would have worked. And instead they come off with this attitude of, I demand your complete unconditional surrender. You will give us everything we want first, and then we'll do something nice for you. That's not negotiation. That's bullying. That's tyranny. And knowing the Asian mindset, I'm not surprised it fell flat on its face here. Okay, the United States Navy wants to build a ghost fleet of drone warships. They're going to build 10 new warships over the next 5 years that don't carry any sailors. They're designed to carry sensors and weapons. They're going to be 300 feet long, displacing 2,000 tons, and the vessels are meant to extend the sensor range of fleets at sea. The ships will also carry weapons, giving the fleet greater firepower, and asset commanders won't hesitate to send on the most dangerous missions, since that won't mean endangering the lives of sailors. Well, it sounds good, but I'm smelling boondoggle again. Because the United States has such a terrible record of building these things. And obviously drone warships are going to be communicated with over some kind of communication system. And as we already saw with the USS Donald Cook, those can be jammed. That recent RAND report on battle simulations with Russia and China said that is the weak point. All of this networking of resources, which looked good on paper and it sounded good in the presentations, that's now the weak spot. If an enemy can jam those transmissions, those 10 warships are just sitting ducks. And you know something? Things break on ships. The sea is a harsh mistress. Things break on ships. And if it's a drone, you can't send somebody down below decks to see what the heck happened. I don't think it's a very good idea. I don't think it's workable. Anyway, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And let's turn to the domestic politics. And by the way, Trump, just signed his first veto. He vetoed that resolution against his national emergency. So we'll see what's going to happen on that. And again, we're seeing a process of political infighting where everyone is trying to score points while ignoring the reality of what is going on down at the border. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Meanwhile, getting back to domestic politics here. More and more is coming on out about what was going on with the FBI investigation and the Robert Mueller investigation into collusion. And it turns out that in some of the testimony by former Attorney General Loretta Lynch, there's a key finding that is not going to make the FBI look very good. Now, normally, if the FBI thinks that an individual or an organization or a business is possibly being approached by foreign nationals with ill intent, they will hold what is called a defensive briefing with that individual or organization. In other words, they'll knock on the door and say, listen, we think some Chinese agents or Russian agents or whatever are trying to get into your organization. They never did that with Trump. He never got the defensive briefing. And to me, that signals that, yes, indeed, they wanted this to happen. I mean, this guy was a presidential candidate. And the FBI claims they had reason to think that he was being approached by these foreign agents, and they never even told him. Now, this next story, this is a good one. Peter Strzok's testimony has a real bombshell in there, in which the Justice Department and Hillary Clinton's legal team negotiated a deal that prevented the FBI from accessing any of the emails on Hillary Clinton's homebrew server related to the Clinton Foundation. This came from the recently released testimony from Peter Strzok. And it was here you have the Clinton lawyers and the Department of Justice, the Obama Department of Justice, saying to the FBI, you cannot look at the emails on the private email server. Now, supposedly, it was limited to the Clinton Foundation, which kind of makes you wonder if that is really the heart of the corruption. Anyway, former New York City Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik is saying that FBI agents are, his quotes, scared to death, end quote, to criticize political corruption and abuses of power at the FBI and the Department of Justice. And apparently he offered his analysis on Wednesday's edition of Sirius XM's Breitbart News Tonight in an interview with hosts Rebecca Mansour and Joel Pollack. So Kerik is commenting on the partisan and political corruption at the FBI and Department of Justice. And yes, they always have been to an extent. But these days, it's just gone to an extreme. They're totally corrupted. They're totally compromised. Yeah, it's a swamp. Okay. Yet another piece of information has come on out that apparently during the interview by the FBI with Carter Page and George Papadopoulos, both of these individuals made exculpatory statements that undercut this Trump-Russia collusion theory peddled to the FBI by Democratic sources, but the FBI ignored those statements and plowed ahead anyway with this unprecedented intrusion into a presidential campaign and kept the evidence of the two men's innocence from the courts. That's obstruction of justice. There's still a brouhaha going on around Ilhan Omar, and apparently the National Conference on Jewish Affairs organized a protest at Nancy Pelosi's office over the recently passed anti-hate resolution. And they're angry because they wanted it to specifically name Ilhan Omar, and they wanted it to be only about Israel. And, hate against Jews is wrong, which it is. We'll stipulate that right up. But in order to get the bill passed, they also had to add in hate against Mexicans is wrong, hate against Muslims is wrong, they could have just said hate against everybody is wrong. But that's not what this National Conference on Jewish Affairs wants. And now they're basically lobbying Nancy Pelosi to remove Omar from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Meanwhile, back up in Minnesota, Democratic leaders are considering finding a primary challenger for 2020 to basically get her voted out of office in 2020. She offended Israel. She offended Israel. Oh, we can't have that. And you know something? Every time something like this happens, it only validates what Omar said. I think we've reached a point right now where there isn't anything that Israel supporters can do that isn't going to make the problem worse, because Americans are paying attention. The poll numbers show it. American support for Israel is at a 10-year low. So, now Adam Schiff was originally battling Pelosi over the issue of impeaching Donald Trump. And Pelosi said she wasn't interested in doing it now, that there had to be a real clear case, which was an admission they don't have one, and that it had to be bipartisan, which means she's angling to have the Senate remove after the House impeaches. And Adam Schiff was out there, oh, there's plenty of evidence for impeachment. Of course, he's never come up with any. He's never shown us anything. Now he's backpedaling. And he's saying that he agrees with Nancy Pelosi that impeachment is not a good idea unless it's bipartisan. See, I think an attempt by the Democrats to impeach Trump is going to blow up in their face. They're looking at it as being able to campaign on it in 2020. Well, he was impeached. He must have done something. And but if they impeach but fail to remove, it's going to be seen as a Democratic failure. And I think probably most Americans, let me make it personal. I know I am sick and tired of all the infighting. And maybe I should be grateful that the more they're going after each other with hammers and tongs, the less they're able to meddle in our lives. But it is getting very fatiguing to watch this go on. I'm getting faction fatigue here. Andrew Weissman, the architect of the case against Paul Manafort, is stepping down from the Mueller inquiry, which is another sign that it is in fact coming to a close. He's going to study and teach at New York University and work on some public service projects, including his longstanding interest in preventing wrongful convictions by shoring up forensic science standards used in courts. Well, if true, that is a very noble thing, because there have been so many scandals involving police labs, even the FBI lab. Remember Frederick Whitehurst? Frederick Whitehurst ran the FBI's crime lab, and he blew the whistle that the FBI crime lab routinely rigged the lab tests to favor the prosecution. And there have been other cases where people running these labs, and instead of testing the drugs, they're taking them. It's just a horrendously wrecked system. And there are wrongful convictions. I remember after one of these lab scandals broke, there was like hundreds and hundreds of people had their sentences, commuted. They were let go. Their lives were still derailed and wrecked. Now, this one's a little bit of surprise, and you're not going to get a lot of sorrow out of me. But down at the Southern Poverty Law Center, which does very little about poverty. In fact, they've got about $500 million in their treasury right now. But down at the Southern Poverty Law Center, they just fired their founder, Morris Dees. And they're not saying exactly why, except the statement that was issued by SPLC said that misconduct played a role in the decision. And it sounds to me like Morris did something he shouldn't. And there's one paragraph I think may point the way. It says, today we announced of immediate concrete next steps we're taking, including bringing in an outside organization to conduct a comprehensive assessment of our internal climate and workplace practices to ensure that our talented staff is working in the environment that they deserve, one in which all voices are heard and all staff members are respected. Now, Morris Dees, if I recall correctly, he's older than I am. And so it's probably a good time for him to go into retirement. Earlier in the week, we were talking about how The Intercept, which is owned by First Look Media, we're going to discontinue managing the archive of all the leaked documents provided by Edward Snowden. And First Look Media was saying, well, it's a cost-cutting measure. We're spending too much money on it. We have to let the archive maintainers go, and we need the servers. He was barred from attending a company meeting yesterday on this issue. Now, Poitras was the initial recipient of Snowden's trove of NSA documents and a driving force behind the bombshell stories they yielded beginning in 2013. Now, since 2014, Poitras and Intercept co-founder Glenn Greenwald have entrusted The Intercept to maintain the voluminous archive. I hope they kept a backup somewhere. So the trove of information includes millions of files that have been the basis for major stories worldwide concerning the growth and reach of 21st century mass digital surveillance. And now First Look Media is saying, it's not important. Not important at all. All right, let's talk about the economic news. Two former Goldman Sachs bankers, Tim Leissner and Roger Ng, spelled NG, have been banned from the banking industry for life for their participation in a scheme to illegally divert billions of dollars from a Malaysian sovereign wealth fund. Leissner was also fined $1.42 million. So apparently these two were former senior investment bankers employed by foreign subsidiaries of the Goldman Sachs Group. And they coordinated these bond offerings arranged by Goldman for one Malaysia development Berhad. Now, if you've been paying attention, that one MDB is a huge scandal over in Malaysia. And apparently the funds diverted from one MDB were then used for the conspirators' personal benefit and to bribe certain government officials in Malaysia and Abu Dhabi. Okay, according to this article in Zero Hedge, the reverse mortgage is coming back. And it could be a problem for millennials because reverse mortgages can evaporate any inheritance they might get. But what a reverse mortgage does is basically it supplements your retirement income based on the equity in your home. And the idea is that when you finally pass away, the reverse mortgage company gets ownership of the house. And they were popular for a while, then they weren't popular for a while because people realized that, this basically meant that everything they'd worked for to leave to their children was going back to the bankers, and they really didn't like that. Okay. Oh boy. It's a bad day. This is just now breaking. Century City Mall in Los Angeles is put on lockdown amid reports of an active shooter. This was tweeted out from the LAPD. I know that mall. I used to do magic shows there. All right, we're going to keep an eye on that one here. But getting on back to the economic news, department store sales hit a new record low, and this is looking at the data going all the way back to 1992. Talk about retail Mageddon. Now, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has met with top oil executives to put pressure on them to stop doing business with Iran. And the outreach represents a new campaign to sway industry executives to Trump's energy dominance agenda that seeks to advance diplomatic and policy objectives through rapidly expanding U.S. oil and gas exports. So now they're weaponizing the oil and gas. And apparently they had executives from companies like Chevron, Total, Royal Dutch Shell, ConocoPhillips, and Occidental Petroleum. Man, oh man, oh man. All right, earlier this week, Rouhani visited Iraq, which was a major defeat for Donald Trump. It looks like they have signed a lot of economic deals. And there's going to be this huge economic cooperation between them. So despite the Iran-Iraq war, which was really kind of ginned up by the United States anyway, they seem to be getting together. And maybe both of these nations realized they never really had a reason to fight each other than that they were being goaded by the United States picadors. All right, but that's good news. I'm a great believer in commerce. Peace through commerce. Better to make deals than make war. All right, we're coming up here on another commercial break. And, okay. I'm multitasking again. Oh, we do have a caller waiting on the line. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we go to the phones here, a little bit of a follow-up on that story that was coming out of Los Angeles at the Century City Mall. The LAPD responded to a report of a shooting at the location. They're on the scene. They're saying there's no indication that it actually happened. Apparently somebody thought this was their idea of fun to call in a phony report here. Okay, we're going to go to the phones here. Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike. I was watching Trump do his veto thing on the congressional thing to stop him declaring an emergency. And it was interesting because right after everything, the first question was about the threat of white nationalism, and, the bodies are just cooling. And it's just this whole thing just really stinks. I mean, I'm not saying these people weren't killed or nothing, but this guy bringing up Trump, Candace Owens, PewDiePie, all these enemies of the controlled establishment. It's just too perfect for them to have it in New Zealand, which is a huge Illuminati hangout. There's the Five Eyes there that was Hillary was always going over there to spy on Trump. And then to have it so convenient, the white nationalism and all the boogeyman of of the establishment, the Illuminati, whatever you want to call them. It's another stink job, and I just it really sickens me to see how quick and lapdog this slavish media is.
Yeah.
The minute I saw that first question, the threat of white nationalism. Now, if this was roles reversed and it was like an Islamic guy that killed a bunch of Christians, do you think the media's first question is going to be about the threat of Islamic extremism to the president? Not in a million years. We all know that.
No, it isn't. And by the way, I have a question, okay? New Zealand has very strict gun laws. The guy that they arrested for the shooting is from Australia. Just how is it he got his guns from Australia and into New Zealand past airport security and the New Zealand authorities?
That's because he was a government operative or working for the SAS or the MI6 or one of those. I'm sure, this guy, this whole story stinks. But the thing is, with the media the way it is today, you could have a complete sham, and it's on the news for 2 or 3 days, and then nobody ever covers all the parts that fall apart. Kind of like Sandy Hook.
Yeah.
It gets what it wants, which is that like speed rush, and then when the whole story crashes, nobody's around to talk about it, and then you're a nut for bringing it up like a month later. How the whole story's a lot of baloney. They demonize you. Oh well, how dare you question that? It's white nationalists. Trump's responsible. How dare you? It's just I wanted to bring up one thing. We're talking about impeachment, and I remember like right after Trump got elected, maybe like 2 months, I'm at the Walmart. I met this guy from Hawaii. He was a real nice guy, but I guess he was a liberal because when it came up about Trump, he says, well, we got to impeach him. And I remember saying then, and it's still true today, well, why don't you just wait and vote him out, And I feel that way about this whole impeachment thing. I think that the Democrats are realizing, like, well, why don't we, the whole thing might blow up in our face, and in another year and a half, you vote him out. He's gone.
Well, I think it's because they were concerned that Trump could actually show some spine and cause some real damage to the deep state. But at this point, I think they've decided that he has been brought to heel and he's collared. And at this point, he's harmless. Anyway, Joe, got to let you go. Got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 2. The phone lines are still open. 800-313-9443. Okay. Iran just held a massive drone drill in the Persian Gulf, and it was done to showcase its military and technological prowess. And the drill involved some 50 Iranian-made drones, and of course Israel is saying, "Oh my goodness, we can't have that." And a lot of the drones were operating along key choke points in the Persian Gulf. So Iran is sending a message. Force on force, the Iranian Navy could not stand up to the United States Navy, but with this drone force, seems to be a bit of an equalizer. And the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps described the drills as Iran's largest exercise of its kind to date and occurred mostly near the Strait of Hormuz. And for the first time, 50 Iranian drones on the RQ-170 model operated with a number of assault and combat drones. So they had several different. They're poking the U.S. in the eye because the RQ-170 is the drone that Iran spoofed to get it to land in their territory, and they've copied it, and they're building a lot of them. And there was a video that came out. Very well shot, edited very quickly, so you get the sense of excitement without giving away too many secrets about what's going on. But it looks like it's capable equipment here. Former White House Chief Economic Advisor Gary Cohn said that President Donald Trump is losing the trade war with China and urged him to basically ease up, and said that cutting a deal with China would score a big win. And this tariff war has caused a lot of harm, yes, to China, but also to the American people. And when Donald Trump started this whole thing, I said, where this falls apart, I understand protecting American businesses, but if those businesses aren't ready to go, if they're not ready to step into that vacuum with the same products and services and produce that were being imported, then it's not going to work, because we still have to buy from China what we were buying before. And guess who gets to pay that tariff? You do. And American farmers were very unhappy about what was going on. This was a lose-lose. Forget about win-win. This was a lose-lose. The U.S. and Canada have now expanded their anti-Russia sanctions over Ukraine. And 21 individuals and 12 entities were added to the sanctions list. The U.S. has imposed sanctions targeting 6 Russian nationals, including Board Guard Service Deputy Director Medvedev. Wow, that's reaching pretty high here. And apparently the new set of restrictions have been introduced in coordination with the European Union and Canada. Okay. Well, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Donald Trump did the first veto of his administration, blocking that resolution to basically undo Trump's emergency declaration. It passed 59 to 41. Trump has vetoed it, and the Senate obviously lacks a 2/3 majority to overturn. Meanwhile, down on the border, remember the National Guard troops were sent on down there, and a lot of people are saying, you know, why? They are legally forbidden from conducting law enforcement on U.S. soil. But it turns out they found other ways to help, mostly by helping border control agents and the local police to do their jobs better. And as a result, the National Guard troops helped with the arrest of 23,034 illegal immigrants, and they seized more than 35,000 pounds of drugs during the 6 months they were deployed to the border in fiscal 2018. So, you know, Trump has a valid point. Closing the border is not just about illegal immigration, it's about curbing that drug trade. And it seems like our government just really doesn't care that much about it. And again, I refer you back to that story. The United Nations was having a conference on the international drug crisis. And when the Venezuelan representative got up to speak, the U.S. delegation just marched out. All right. Over in Great Britain, things are getting really tense with the Brexit, as you may have remembered from earlier in the week. Parliament voted down Theresa May's latest plan. They then voted for a 3-month extension to Brexit. Then they voted down the idea of a new referendum. Well, that may not be the end of it, because European Union leaders are saying they're under no obligation to go along with a 3-month extension to Brexit. And they're not going to go along with it unless Great Britain makes it clear what it is that they want. So Brussels has said it will listen to a request for more time if Britain provides a good reason. But Guy Verhofstadt said last night it was up to the UK to take a cross-party approach to find a breakthrough. In other words, they're getting tired of the faction fighting between the Tories and Labour. Meanwhile, Donald Trump came on out and said, well, she should have listened to me. Trump is now saying the Brexit debacle could have been avoided if Theresa May had heeded his advice. And there is Trump's ego fully on display. And apparently Trump is disparaging Theresa May's negotiating skills, saying that Britain could have been spared a hot mess if only she'd listened to him and the art of the deal. I don't think so. This isn't about a business deal. This was about the Brexiteers versus the Remainers. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Earlier in the week, we were talking about how Finland is in a state of collapse. And it's an embarrassment for American socialists like Bernie Sanders, who are holding it up as the perfect example of how socialism can work. But Finland basically came on down because of the cost of its universal health care. And now another one of the European socialist countries that are often held up by American socialist candidates, they're in trouble. Denmark. And Denmark is basically looking at, they're in a state of what's called unreported collapse. And in their case, it's tied in a lot with the open borders and just this crush of people coming on in and adding a burden to the economy. Now, have you noticed that Israel is always on the forefront of supporting open borders for everybody else but for themselves? And as you may recall, Israel is now trying to repatriate, if you will, the African migrants who've been moving in to Israel. And they had this plan where they're going to send half of them back. And the Israelis didn't agree with it. They want all of them back out. And these activists are out there saying that this United Nations plan to resolve the issue of African migrants in Israel it has been revived. And the activists are saying it's a call by the head of Israel's Immigration Authority for the IDF to literally open fire on any Africans who subsequently try to sail to Israel seeking asylum. So let me back up and paraphrase that here. Basically, Israel, which says open borders and migration is good for every other country on earth, are now saying they're not going to take any more Africans in, and that any Africans who try and get into their country will be shot. And this is coming from the head of Israel's Immigration Authority for the IDF. Little double standard. All right, well, let's talk about the 737 MAX and the Boeing company. This is a PR and economic disaster for the Boeing company, more PR than economic. But right now, there are $600 billion in Boeing 737 orders currently at risk. Because all of these contracts, they always have out clauses, escape clauses. If it turns out the aircraft has got a flaw that cannot be fixed, yeah, these orders will be canceled. That's $600 billion. Now, they're starting the analysis on the black boxes, which are going to be the digital flight recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. They're saying it'll take a few days. But already, controllers on the ground knew something was wrong just from the data block coming back from the radar transponder, because they could see the planes were porpoising hundreds of feet up and down, and gaining speed to dangerous levels. They were flying dangerously fast. And to me, that says the problem is in the anti-stall system. And of course, we've got these two crashes, the one in Ethiopia and the one in Indonesia last year, that appear remarkably similar. And now we've had these other pilots who've come on out saying they've experienced similar issues on their 737 MAX, although it didn't lead to a crash in their case. So a lot of these people who were going to order aircraft from Boeing, they're starting to have cold feet and say they want guarantees that the planes are not defective. Okay, now getting on back here to that college admissions scandal. This is a bad one, and everybody's saying this is the worst they've ever seen. It turns out how this all came about. The FBI had no idea that this was going on. The FBI were investigating this executive in a securities fraud investigation. And apparently, in the course of interviewing him, he's the one who said that a women's soccer coach at Yale University offered to label the executive's daughter as a recruit to get her into Yale in exchange for cash. And that was the beginning of the whole unraveling. And the executive told authorities who were working on the market fraud case that Rudy Meredith, the former women's soccer coach at Yale University, said, yeah, I'll get her into college, in exchange for some cash here. And the lawsuits are already flying, more than $500 billion so far. And basically, the accusation is that all of these universities were allowing students to waste their money applying for elite schools when it's actually being rigged in favor of the rich. Now, I don't know what kind of a remedy the courts may consider, but I think there's room for punitive damages. Of course, the big question is, did the universities know? And unless they can prove the universities know and did a nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, I don't think the lawsuits are going to have all that much success. But again, it's a public relations nightmare. Even if these universities weren't knowingly part of this, it's still a stain. Now, Lori Loughlin's daughters, Olivia and Isabella, have both quit the University of Southern California in the wake of the college bribery scandal, saying they were terrified of bullies. What they're really trying to do is avoid the shame of being expelled. Lori Loughlin herself has been dropped from Netflix's Fuller House, and she's played Aunt Becky on the original Full House as well as the revival. She will not be returning for the show's 5th season. Apparently, the Hallmark Channel is cutting ties with Loughlin, who allegedly paid $500,000 to get her daughters into USC. This is really unraveling. And it turns out there's another cheating scandal. Apparently, this is reported in Daily Mail, Lori Loughlin's YouTube star daughter was on a game show she took part on that was rigged to let her win. Now, lifestyle vlogger Olivia Jade Giannulli, who is Lori Loughlin's daughter, took fellow influencer Marissa Rachel and singer Rydell Lynch on a 2016 episode of Tap That Awesome app for a now defunct Verizon mobile phone channel. Rachel was declared the winner in front of a live audience. And she says the studio executives mysteriously stepped in and ordered the producers to reshoot the final few questions, and then ordered Rachel and Lynch not to buzz in with the correct answers, which allowed Lori Loughlin's daughter to win, to take home first prize, which was a $5,000 donation to a charity of her choice. I mean, what's the point of cheating in a situation like that? You know, some charity's going to get the money anyway, but it betrays a mindset that this is acceptable behavior in our society right now. So you've got Lori Loughlin and designer Massimo Giannulli, her husband. They're worth a reported $100 million, and apparently they're facing federal mail fraud charges along with other wealthy parents accused in this. So, remember the old saying, cheaters never prosper? Well, at least in this one case, it appears they didn't. And it appears the problem may be more widespread, because apparently federal investigators arrested 5 people for helping Chinese nationals cheat their way into U.S. universities and then perhaps into U.S. jobs and research laboratories. So this is very widespread. I remember an article from not too long ago where somebody was screaming about, Chinese spies in research laboratories. And I'm wondering if the two are linked up. Anyway, the indictment charges the defendants with conspiring to use false passports and aggravated identity theft as part of the scheme to impersonate Chinese nationals who were required to take the test of English as a foreign language to obtain a student visa. And student visas are the first step into the U.S. jobs market for many Chinese and Indian graduates. If I understand this correctly, because it looks like it's a bad translation, I think what they got is they got Chinese people who are already living here to impersonate the incoming Chinese nationals to take that English test. That's what it sounds like to me. Right. Tulsi Gabbard is out there attacking Facebook over censorship and saying free speech has to be free speech for all Americans. She's absolutely right about that. And she's calling on Americans to stand united against attempts by Facebook and others to censor, stifle, and influence public debate. So, way to go, Tulsi. Now, Facebook, of course, is dealing with a lot of problems. They're under criminal investigation for some of their data mining and data sharing practices. And they're losing readership, along with all of their technical issues with their big outage earlier this week. Ann Coulter is out there saying something that I had commented on earlier in the week. Trump is ignoring the deplatforming of Alex Jones and other top supporters. The president is allowing loyal backers to be silenced. And she says it's clear that Trump isn't waiting for a better moment. This was not an anomaly. It's not an accident. After he signed his third spending bill with no wall funding, which he claims to need, all sentient beings were forced to conclude the president has no intention of ever doing anything that we wanted on immigration. And she's right about the fact that Trump has turned his back on the independent media, which means we're not going to be there to support him in 2020. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Twitter's just announced they're going to ban people who spread conspiracy theories. The problem is a lot of conspiracy theories eventually turn out to be conspiracy facts. You know, it was actually the CIA that came up with that conspiracy theorist label in the aftermath of the assassination of John F. Kennedy to dismiss people who were pointing at the obvious contradictions and problems in the official crazed lone nut story. Oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. We don't need to even listen to you. Speaking of inconsistent, somebody just emailed me about the New Zealand situation. How is it possible that a white nationalist says he was highly influenced by Candace Owens, who is a beautiful black woman? Your caller is right. Something is rotten about this. Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. Okay. All right. Getting on back here. Bad news for gun manufacturers. The Connecticut Supreme Court sided with anti-gun interests by giving the green light for a lawsuit against companies that manufactured and sold the semi-automatic rifle that Adam Lanza supposedly used to kill 26 people at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And the Sandy Hook victims basically, they originally sued Remington in 2014 for facilitating the shooting. And this recent ruling allows the lawsuit to move forward to trial, and that could legally compel gun companies to turn over internal communications and other sensitive information to anti-gun government agencies. Okay, we got a caller on the line here. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I got a little change of topic here, if you can indulge me.
Sure.
I sent you an article that I ran across about half an hour ago on the Iron Dome, and it was from the press for the Jews, not the Jewish press, because the regular press is Jewish, but this is for the Jewish Forward or something. Had an article. I haven't seen it anywhere else, and it is that the United States Army has agreed to buy the Iron Dome and deploy it in Europe, and it's a multi-billion-dollar deal, of course. And I want to remind everybody that we paid to develop the Iron Dome, and now they're selling it back to us. So we paid for its development, and now they're selling it to us. And
okay, well, let me cut in here a little bit. First of all, I'm looking at your email, and the link goes to worldjewishdaily.com. Right. And if memory serves me correct, that was the same website that put out the story that said Assad was saying he would attack Israel if the IDF did not leave Golan. So I at this point I have to say this looks like a phony news site.
Well, it may well be, Mike, but I've heard rumblings of this before. And it wouldn't be surprising to me, in lieu of the fact that, of course, they stole their first fissionable nuclear material from the United States, that they passed nuclear secrets. The Rosenbergs were nuclear spies.
Yes.
The fighter was passed on to China. There's a whole litany. Sidewinder missile was minutely re-engineered. Some minute change, they sold it to China.
Yes.
On and on and on. So this is nothing new here at all. And I know they've made rumblings about it before, but I happened to see this article, and frankly, I believe it. That's just exactly something that we would do. And I believe this article, and we'll see if it's true or not. But I bet that we're that on our knees to do to them that we would do this. We paid for this thing. There's no argument that we paid for its development. And there's also no argument that if Israel, the Iron Dome gets that, then Raytheon or somebody else that's an American company does not get it.
Yes.
So, this happens again and again. And I would tell you, I'll make a bet with you. I'll bet you whatever. I'll bet you a lunch or something that this ends up being true.
Well, I'll take you up on that bet here, because I got to tell you, it would be a very awkward thing for the United States to do at a time when it is trying to sell more of its weapons to other countries. And especially when you look at that brouhaha over in Turkey, where Turkey wants the S-400 and the U.S. is trying to force them to buy the Patriot. If the U.S. turns around and starts buying Israeli-made aerial defense weapons, then everybody's going to say, well, this is America admitting their weapons aren't as good. And that would be a disaster for our defense contractors. So I got to tell you, I'm not as trusting of this story, especially because, again, this appears to be the same source that put out that Assad was going to attack Israel if the IDF did not leave the Golan. Anyway, Peter, we got to take another break for commercials. Got to let you go, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I owe Peter in Los Angeles an apology, because the Times of Israel is now reporting that the U.S. is purchasing the Iron Dome, even though they're not saying where they're going to use it yet, but it's going to be used to protect our troops. So, yeah, Peter had a valid point. We paid for the development of that weapon system, and now Israel's just selling it back to us. Okay, let's go back to the phones here. Terry in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, Peter's my favorite caller. And you know how you have people like that girl from Canada as a joint host some days? I'd like to see you have Peter on there, because he's got a lot of experience. He's on probably somebody's staff in the Middle East, since he's 30 years in the Army. But the reason I called is before he called, you were talking about that Remington suit, about
yes.
Adam Lanza. The good part is I hope it goes through, because they can expose the whole thing. If it does, where are these rifles? Do these people get killed by this rifle? And let's get the evidence in here, and let's get these witnesses and expose that whole thing.
Well, I'm sure that the judge would not. The judge would basically start the case by saying, we're starting from the point of view that the official story is the official story, and he's not going to allow that to happen. But the suit is nonsense, and we've been hearing liberals talk about this. Let's sue the gun makers, for the things that people do wrong with the guns. You never hear them say, let's sue the knife makers for when somebody does a stabbing. And let's say somebody takes a car and in a fit of rage, they drive up on the sidewalk and they deliberately run over a bunch of people. You don't hear the public screaming, let's sue the car makers. It's only in the case of the guns, and it's an attempt to try and drive the gun manufacturers out of business.
Well, if they're suing from the standpoint of Sandy Hook, they have to bring the Sandy Hook incident into it. And who's suing, and what are they basing their lawsuit on?
They're basically the whole point of the lawsuit is that Remington should bear responsibility, financial responsibility, for the misuse of its product. And as I pointed out in the context of cars and knives, no. Let's say, and again, another ridiculous example. Let's say somebody has an eating disorder and they literally eat themselves to death. Are we going to sue the makers of the flatware, or the ice cream company or whatever. I mean, taken to a ridiculous extreme, you can see how pointless this all is. It's just another way to harass and demonize and vilify the gun makers.
Okay, well, they can't bring the Sandy Hook thing into it then at all.
I would imagine
if they do, they got to look at the evidence.
I would imagine that the judge will not allow that to happen. I'm sure that the defense attorneys for Remington will try and bring that up, but maybe they can get Wolfgang Halbig in there. But for those of us who've been paying attention, we know the whole thing was just a hoax, But they do have the rifle that was associated with Adam Lanza, and it is a Remington product, and that's what the whole lawsuit is about. You made this rifle, Adam Lanza supposedly killed a bunch of people with it, therefore you should give us a lot of money.
Well, if the judge depends upon what court he's from and who's got control over him, and if that's true, the whole legal system, the whole civil legal system in the United States is a big hoax, and it's all phony.
Well, it pretty much is. I mean, the U.S. government is never, ever, ever going to allow any of these false flags to be examined in a court of law or on corporate media, whether it's Sandy Hook or 9/11 or the Boston Marathon bombing. I mean, that one was really obvious, the way they railroaded Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. Where his so-called defense attorney walks in and the first thing she says is, he's guilty. What kind of a defense is that? And here at my website, I had enough evidence to create reasonable doubt, and that's all it takes to get an acquittal. But yeah, the court system is corrupt. It's there to basically enforce the will of the government. And the will of the government is you will believe the official story of Sandy Hook, and we're going to take a bunch of money away from Remington and give it to all these people who helped us pull the hoax off.
Yeah, well, I hope it doesn't go that way. But anyway, Mike, that was my only point, and I'll listen to you the rest of the show on the computer. Bye. All
right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. But if this actually does go to trial, I think the best defense that Remington can take is what I just said here. If somebody takes a car and in a moment of road rage runs up on a sidewalk and kills a bunch of people, how is the car manufacturer responsible for that? And I think that's going to make the point. I think it will make the point here. Getting on back to gun rights, down in Kentucky, Governor Bevin signed Senate Bill 150 into law, which allows Kentuckians 21 or older who are allowed to legally possess a firearm to conceal it without a permit. He has restored constitutional carry. Now, getting on back to knives, and you're going to love this one. Tory Member of Parliament Scott Mann is out there calling for strict new knife control measures in Great Britain, including for every blade sold in Britain to be fitted with GPS tracking systems. And the idea being that you will buy a knife, you will take it home, and the GPS will make sure it stays at home. And that if that knife is taken out of your home, you better have a good explanation saying that there will be obvious exceptions for activities such as fishing. And what this guy is actually saying, if you think about it, is, Britain has very strict gun control. You're still allowed to own guns, but only they have to be kept at shooting clubs. You can't have them in your home. And despite that, people are still getting murdered. They're not being shot, they're being stabbed. And it's a reminder, it's not the guns that are killing people, it's people that are killing people. And if you take away the knives, they'll find something else, a hammer, a baseball bat. Or they'll run them up on the sidewalk with a car and run them down. But this one is utterly ridiculous. I mean, I have a Swiss Army knife here on my belt. What does he want to do, track that with GPS? Okay. Apparently in the West End of London, there's a theater that put in gender-neutral toilets that have these exposed urinals, and it's just created a huge outrage. And apparently one woman complained saying, "I don't want to see genitalia unless it's my husband's." So again, they're forcing that whole gender fluid unisex thing here. All right, let's talk about Senator Jeff Markley. He's a Democrat from Oregon, and he is sponsoring a Senate bill that would prevent kittens from being killed after they're used in research. Okay? And it's for the kittens. The Kitten Act would protect cats from being euthanized after government testing. And Merkley said the practice is archaic and horrific. Mind you, this is the same Markley who voted against the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. So save the kittens, slaughter the newborn babies. That's this guy's agenda. There's got to be something in the water in Washington, D.C. All righty. Major storm that it's winding out finally. They're calling it a cyclone of historic proportions. It set barometric pressure records on the low end, stranded over 1,100 drivers. It's left nearly 200,000 without power. And it's going to continue to bring blizzard conditions to parts of the northern plains and Rockies, basically now, where travel remains very difficult. Heavy rain, snowmelt, and ice jams on rivers have produced widespread flooding across the upper Midwest. We're getting into NOAA territory. And there is a lot of flooding. Nebraska's got a lot of flooding. And, of course, that happens when you have that much snow. When it melts, it's got to go somewhere. Another little article, this one from Sierra Star. A surprising snowstorm in the mountains. And it basically saying that the winter started out being very tame, which is exactly what the original Farmer's Almanac said it would be. But boy, did it get intense. And they're talking basically about starting in February, temperatures dropped. Serious storm came on in, 12 inches of snow. And basically his town literally got snowed in. There were only 2 roads in or out. Both of them were blocked. Over in Green Bay, they've issued more than 100 fines for unshoveled sidewalks. And that's, well, you may make a few bucks. The snow piles up. Your shoveling does not meet city standards. Here's a fine here. Over in California, it's snowing in the California vineyards, and that's actually a good thing because it delays the waking up of the grapevines. And that means that when they do come into bloom and produce fruit, the fruit is going to be better and sweeter and produce a better wine. So this is going to be a good year for California wines, for those of you who are aficionados of California wines. Over in Billings, Montana, they're saying finally the temperatures are starting to approach what they should be, what the historical average is going to be. And it's actually starting to warm up here as well. A while back, there was this experiment over in Stockholm in gender-equal snow plowing. And Stockholm used to have a policy where they would clear the main roads and areas like construction sites before they would get to the pavements and cycle lanes. And this was denounced as sexist because men are more likely to drive and women more likely to travel on foot. And women were slipping on the ice, and they complained the system was sexist. So they said, all right, we're going to have gender-equal snow plowing. We're going to pay attention to the bike lanes and the sidewalks. And that, of course, meant that the main roads were less cleared, the construction sites were less cleared, and everything just, they described it as chaos. Maybe you just need more snowplows. Okay, probably a lot of you have not heard of this. It's a group called the Club of Rome. It's a global elite group. They are globalists, and they are just gushing over the Green New Deal. Now, the Club of Rome was founded back in 1968. They were the original elite group who created crisis mode global cooling. Then when that didn't work out, they switched to global warming. And they produced this infamous paper called The Limits to Growth that was positioned as a report for the Club of Rome's project on the predicament of mankind. And Limits to Growth, as the name implies, is basically saying population reduction to create an economic equilibrium between population and available resources. So they love the Green New Deal. Over in Fukushima, they're running into a bit of a problem because they've got all this toxic soil that they're having to dig up from around the ruined reactor, and nobody wants to take it. They're filling up all of these sacks with radioactive soil. You can see them in the Google Earth if you go over there. And it's these huge black sacks filled with the soil, and it's just sitting there. Nobody knows what they're going to be able to do with it. And of course, those black plastic sacks are not blocking the radiation. It is still heavily radioactive over there. Now, here's an interesting little story. French and German farmers are digging up thousands of hectares of rapeseed fields after traces of genetically modified organism were found in seeds sold by Bayer. Now, GMOs are banned for cultivation in both France and Germany, and these farmers thought that they were buying GMO-free seeds from Bayer, and they weren't. You know, in Europe, few varieties of GMO are authorized for growing, mostly due to environmental concerns. But during a routine check, French authorities found out GMO seeds in 3 rapeseed seed batches sold by DeKalb, a brand previously owned by Monsanto, before the company was taken over by Bayer in 2018. So these GMO crops are not authorized in Europe, although GMO produce can be imported for food and animal feed. Now, Bayer's chief operating officer for France said the source of the contamination is not known yet, because supposedly the seeds were produced in Argentine GMO-free area. Well, it's obviously not GMO, and that's the problem. The pollen from GMO plants does not stop at that little 10-yard barrier that Monsanto stipulated. We had a story up here where GMO pollen from a wheat crop that was being grown experimentally, was not authorized for use, was found 4 states away. Pollen is carried by the wind, it's carried by the birds, it's certainly carried by the bees. You can't contain it. And that's what we're seeing. It happened here. Obviously, that Argentine GMO-free area is not GMO-free. So it's a huge, huge problem. Okay. Stephen Hawking, we all respected him. I disagree with him on the Big Bang, obviously. Apparently, a probe has found that his nurse that took care of him for the last 8 years of his life finds that she failed to provide the care he deserved, and that Hawking may have actually died more of neglect than of his illness. And that is a real tragedy, because he was getting this close on his cosmological constant. Okay, we got to take another break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, the first International Summit on Human Gene Editing was back in December 2015, and they released a statement in which they were unanimous in agreeing that the creation of genetically modified children was irresponsible unless we knew for sure it was safe. Well, obviously that didn't do a lot of good, because in November of last year, Chinese scientist He Jiankui edited embryos to create 2 genetically engineered babies. And other groups are now actively looking to use the technology to enhance humans. Now, CRISPR experts are calling for a global moratorium on inheritable gene editing. In other words, they're saying, don't edit the eggs and the sperm, because whatever comes out of them can pass those changes on. And we don't know what's going to happen. I cannot tell you how dangerous this is. And of course, there can be a global moratorium for civilian scientists, but I have absolutely no doubt that the military labs are already out there. We can create the super soldier. We'll build him better. We'll build him faster. We were talking the other day about that nanoparticle trick that allowed mice to see in infrared. So there's all these military applications. It's dangerous. It is very dangerous. We're playing with the code of life and looking at how recklessly products get developed and deployed, such as vaccines and GMO. This could be dangerous. I get a lot of phone calls from people saying, well, if you're so convinced that the universe is full of intelligent life, why haven't they visited us? And my usual answer is, what do we have that they would be interested in that would make it worth the energy cost to slow down, come down to the bottom of the gravity well, get out of the gravity well, and then reaccelerate to whatever speed they were doing before? Because if they're going from point A to point B and Earth is in the middle, stopping at Earth literally doubles their fuel costs. But there's another possibility, and that may be that every intelligent technological civilization reaches a point where they start playing with their own code of life, whatever their version of DNA is, and they make a mistake and they go extinct. And that is a real possibility. And I'm very, very concerned. Out in Nevada, a former New Jersey priest and teacher who was accused of groping young boys was found shot to death in his Nevada home. And apparently police conducted a welfare check and found the body of John Caparelli in the house he owned on Bonner Springs Drive in Henderson. And he'd been shot once in the neck. His body was found in the kitchen. So possibly an angry parent there. Former Cardinal George Pell, 77, received a 6-year sentence for molesting 2 13-year-old choir boys. There's the music. Time to take a break for station identification. Get the lovely Lady Claire in here, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And for those of you watching on YouTube, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire. And Lady Claire, what have you got to share with us today?
I would first like to go back to that terrible massacre at the mosque at Christchurch. Now, I know that there are some New Zealand folks who do listen to the podcast. If you know anyone from these mosques, if they play with your kids, if they coach, if they do other things, please tell them that Hawaii is with them right now in this terrible moment. I'd like to go to what I would call a really in-your-face poll. And apparently, an article by Caitlin Johnstone, who is a conservative provocateur, with whom we are both familiar, her article had been replaced with what was alleged to be a breaking report from the national news conglomerate, NNC, obey. And what happened was, there was the publication of the results of a groundbreaking study this week, and now, what do you think they found?
Well, reporting. Okay.
And that they had made the discovery that every single person who questions Western military interventionism is both an anti-Semitic bigot and a Russian national.
How could you?
How could you? I refuse to be defined by anyone else. And this is
it's a smear job. It's a smear job. It's trying to get people to shut up. If you question us going into Venezuela, then you're working for the Ruskies, and you're an anti-Semitic bigot.
And apparently this guy felt good enough to put his name on it. He calls himself a research analyst, and it was Les Overton. And I'm not making this up, folks. He is a senior fellow at the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Democracy.
That sounds
Lord.
made up.
It does.
Okay.
It does.
Yeah.
And he told NNC that the ASPCD's research clearly shows that there is a rate of correlation between individual opposing Western foreign policy, harboring a virulent hatred of Jewish people, and being a citizen of the Russian Federation is at least 100%.
Oh, come on! That had to be satire.
I hope it's satire.
It is satire because it's 100%, if not more. I mean, no,
it's insane. It's insane.
That's a joke. That's somebody's idea of a joke.
Well, yes, but it was a very strange joke.
Yeah, but I mean, we're starting to see. I mean, seriously, they're coming up and saying that if you oppose U.S. foreign policy, you're mentally ill, you're unpatriotic, you're this, you're that, and all of these smears are designed to try and convince people to stay silent and not speak out.
And I think what we need to do, as I said a little bit earlier, we cannot be defined by other people's judgment. We have to know who we are and what we're doing and where we're going. I'd like to go over to Ukraine right now, which is in kind of a tailspin. And apparently, Ms. Tymoshenko has revealed there's a huge amount of rigging going on by Poroshenko's team, and she shared that with the EU envoy. And, wow.
Let's see.
What happened was, her name is Yulia Tymoshenko, and she is the leader of, and I'm going to butcher this, Batishkavadina Fatherland Party, and a Ukrainian presidential contender. And she has informed the EU ambassador to Ukraine, Hugis Mingarelli, about an extensive scheme by incumbent President Pyotr Poroshenko's team to rig the upcoming election. Now, that happens 31st of this month, right?
I imagine my shock. Well, from Poroshenko's point of view, if he loses that election, he's going to have to leave Ukraine because he's facing criminal charges.
Yeah, definitely. And the ambassador said all the right things, that the Ukrainian elections must be free, fair, and conducted in accordance with global democratic standards.
Boy, it would be nice if we had that here.
Yeah. Now, I'm kind of wondering, I'm in the Wayback Machine 2014, President Obama. And I have to wonder, Mike, after engineering regime change in Ukraine, where Obama did admit on a CNN interview of having brokered the deal for regime change, one has to wonder if President Obama is experiencing any kind of regime change regrets, seeing how completely unglued this government and this leadership has become.
Well, the project was a failure. I mean, they wanted to basically bring Ukraine into the European Union, or at least keep it out of Russia, the Russian sphere of influence. But right now, because of the prolonged wars and mismanagement, Ukraine is such a basket case. The EU is saying, we're not sure we want this. Or
they're at least saying, we're not ready.
Yeah.
And I have to wonder if President Obama is currently aware that the fact that the best posts in the Ukrainian government are being held by neo-Nazis. Now, Mike, this is more than a little bit scary.
No, it is very scary. It is very, very scary.
I would say that this is one of the worst epic fails of his presidency ever.
It absolutely is. Anyway, we have a caller on the line here.
Okay.
So let us go to Mark in Montana. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy. I kind of wanted to talk about this global warming thing that we Montanans have been putting up with for the last 6 months.
You poor sir.
I'm wintering in Texas this year because the oil boom is on. So it hasn't been too bad down here. But I'll be going home here. I got to get my taxes done eventually. But where I live, I'm about 40 miles south of Billings, on the Crow Indian Reservation near a town called Pryor, Montana. It's up in the Pryor Mountains.
Okay.
And my aunt still runs. There's 9,000 acres there. She's still running that little place. And
wow.
She said that Pryor hit an all-time record low, and this was a couple of weeks ago, of 77 below zero.
Oh my!
She said it
goodness.
was. She said it was just you couldn't even touch the car handles.
I hear you. Yeah.
But we've also had record snowfall, so it's not like it's cold and dry. It's cold and very wet. You know, there's some of those places. I don't see them digging some of the passes out this year. You know, like Beartooth Pass, they usually get it open for about 30 days before it fills back up. I don't see them getting it blown out. Last year they got it all blown out, and then another storm came through and put another 8 feet of snow. So I don't like the word climate change because it's a leftist propaganda tool, I think. But I do see that we're getting colder and wetter, at least in my neck of the woods. And well, I think a lot of that's due to the sun activity.
Would you repeat that last part?
I said I think it's just due to the modern minimum that we're in right
now. That's exactly what's happening. I mean, the entire month of February, there wasn't a single sunspot. And again, that sun is the primary driver of climate on this planet. And all of these climate change hoaxers are out there trying to say, you know, the sun doesn't have an effect, Earth's orbit doesn't have an effect. You know, it's all the fault of you people and your plastic shopping bags.
Yeah, and you know, and us oil field guys, we're the perpetrators of all the plastic shopping bags and stuff out there. You know, the amount of hatred directed towards us is unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's unjustified as well.
Yeah.
And one of the problems I have with these green activists, especially Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they're really good at coming on out and condemning this and condemning that, and oil is bad and coal is bad and everything. Okay, what are we going to use in its place? And then you get a very, very long silence. Or you get some variation of, we have to learn to live without those things. Meaning go back to, living like it's the Middle Ages again.
Yeah. And I don't think that people understand how I guess there's no other way to say it, non-responsible it is to put up these windmills and these solar farms. It takes the amount of resources it takes to produce those items.
Yes.
The energy we'll never realize any gain from them. They said with a windmill it takes 30 years before you start seeing actual positive energy output from them. And we got
before it pencils out.
Like,
I mean, you get energy the instant the windmill starts turning, but you're so much in debt, it's going to take a long time before you're into profits. Plus the fact that the windmills, unfortunately, are falling apart a lot more quickly than expected. As far as solar cells are concerned, there has been a recent breakthrough in efficiency that I think is going to improve that situation. But the reality is the process of manufacturing solar cells is very toxic and produces a lot of toxic waste. And nobody wants to talk about that. It's just solar and wind and oil is bad. And it's simplistic jingoism. And there are too many people out there making declarations about the environment and the climate and what to do about it who just don't know what they're talking about.
And the other one that I always hear is, hemp can save the world. Here's the deal. When you're taking your farming out of production from food and turning it into energy production, you're risking starving populations out around the world that are living on the brink.
Yes.
Where a day's wages are a day's worth of food. Now, I happen to know where I'm talking about on this. It happened in North Africa with, I think it was Chad. We had a drilling rig over there that was drilling, and the town would basically pick up its roots and follow the rig as it moved along, and they provided all the services and restaurants and the laundry, and they were paying the local guys, real well out of the trade union. And when they started with the GMO corn, especially when they started taking the corn production out and the corn prices went through the roof, these people could no longer afford to eat.
Yeah.
And it turned real nasty. I guess they had a guy come up on the rig floor, threatening to kill them all, and they ended up shooting the guy, and they took the rig and put it out of commission. And on those 4 guys, some of them came back through Italy and got on fishing boat. However they could get out of there. There was 16 guys that got out, and of course they were worried about their Bedouin family that was taking care of them over there.
Yeah.
I got a lot of those horror stories like that. I don't think people realize the implications of what we do here and how it affects people in other countries, such as our food, the food production.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to talk about the weather, and I guess I got sidetracked. But
well, no, it's an interesting story. It's an interesting story, and you're right. It does illustrate, the other obvious example, of course, was when they were trying to push this whole ethanol situation, and they were taking farmland that had been growing food here in the United States and turned it over to ethanol production, and as a result, food prices for Americans went through the roof. And as it turned out, the ethanol wasn't really a good idea for older cars. It wrecked their fuel system, and it turned out it was not carbon neutral after all when you added in the emissions from the processing of the plant matter into ethanol. And finally, there's less chemical energy in ethanol than there is in gasoline, so you had to buy and burn more of it to get the same amount of work done.
Right, and it's also the amount of energy it takes to produce the ethanol is more than the energy you get out of the ethanol. It makes no sense. We're stupid just because we think we're doing something for the environment or for energy efficiency or whatever doesn't mean we are.
No, in a lot of cases we're being scammed.
A bunch of politicians involved.
Yeah, we're being scammed. I mean, there's a trend in politics like environmentalism, and you'll have people who will leap forward and say, "Well, we can do this, and give me money, and I'll set up a corporation, and we'll get this," and they'll make a lot of money until it all goes bust, and then they retire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you my ethanol story. A couple jobs ago, the company issued me one of these stupid E85 Dodge pickups, right? So
yes.
I went one day, and I was in North Dakota at the time, and you could buy ethanol E85 up there. And I pulled in one day, and I filled that thing up with E85, and I drove 40 miles and used almost a quarter of a tank of fuel.
Yes.
And I was like 4 miles to the gallon. So I filled it back up with regular fuel, and that truck was never the same. It got, for the rest of the life that I had it, it got crappy fuel mileage, coughed and sputtered. Took it in. They said there was nothing wrong with it. I don't want that stuff, man. I won't put it in my personal vehicle. I run premium.
Yep. Well, what was really interesting is when we got our new car, there was a warning in the manual not to use an EA fuel above a certain number. And fortunately, we found a gas station where we can still get the lower EA fuel. But it's scary. I mean, there are car companies out there like Mercedes who are saying that if you use ethanol in their engines, it will void the warranty on the engine.
Yeah. Yeah, around here in Texas, of course, we're very petroleum friendly. All of the premium fuel is ethanol free. So this big 10-cylinder this V10 that I have in my pickup, I run that premium stuff in it, or it doesn't run worth a crap.
Okay. Yeah, it's a mess out there. It really isn't. Again, it all came about because of this hallucination that the world was warming and that it was all our fault. And it's really messed up the country and the economy and the world.
And I have something to add here, I think. One of the things that gets a consumer educated is being able to look at logic and how things work. And I'm very afraid that our kids in school are not getting any kind of grounding in hard science or logic, and that's why they're lost and unable to make intelligent,
well, that's by
choices.
Design, to turn the kids into just unquestioning consumers.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it all the way up even into the university level, where we're just being turned into obedient workers. You know, you will buy this, you will work and they don't want you thinking and questioning about what's going on. And we're starting to see it now the way social media is now literally cracking down on anybody who questions the official story on anything. It's not just conservatives who are being silenced, but people who are talking about vaccine safety or the GMOs or even now climate change. People who are questioning the dogma of human-caused global warming are getting deplatformed.
Yeah, I think that if Trump doesn't do something about this, he may be in trouble in 2020.
I think he's definitely in trouble in 2020. And, you know, we had that Ann Coulter piece earlier in the show where she just said, Trump is doing nothing about the fact that Alex Jones got deplatformed. And
exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know what Trump is thinking. I mean, he's going to campaign in 2020. I've even seen some of his early campaign ads. He's already out there running commercials to remind everybody how great he is. And, you know, it almost makes you laugh. He's going to be a one-term president. I'm not going to work as hard to support him as I did back in 2016. The only way I'll support Trump in 2020 is if Hillary steps back in. And I won't like it, but I'll do it.
I don't see her stepping back in because I really think that if Trump starts releasing FISA documents and some of the other stuff, that a bunch of the Democrats will go down.
I'd like to see it happen, but right now it seems like however it was done, Trump has been brought to heel because we're seeing a lot more of this work coming out of Judicial Watch than out of the administration.
Yeah, somebody's got something on him, I think.
Either that or he just, you know, he's enjoying the ego trip of being the president of the United States of America. I think that comment he made to Theresa May about how she wouldn't be in the Brexit mess if she'd listened to him.
Ouch.
I think that was arrogant in the extreme.
Very much.
Listen, Mark, we're going to let you go because we are coming up here on a commercial break. And good luck getting back to your home in Billings.
Yeah.
Boy, 70 below. That is really, really very intense. So I guess your next, well, let me turn you down here a little bit.
Thank you.
I turn you down.
For those of you who don't know, listening to the feed and trying to speak because there is a delay.
There is a slight delay here. I've gotten used to it. Anyway, listen, we got to take a break for commercials and we'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show. And Claire, what's your next story?
The next story I have is how the social credit system is coming to America. Now, we have heard about this in China.
Yes.
Where everything you are allowed to do is based on your score.
Yes.
What you have been tweeting, where you have gone to, what you have done, if you owe any back taxes. And unfortunately, it looks to me like a lot of Americans haven't really noticed the descent of this country into a police state. And,
well, a surveillance state. I mean, most Americans are oblivious to just how much our lives are being watched, not just by the government, but by corporations.
Yeah.
And there is no privacy left anymore. And the corporatocracy, if you will, is basically treating us like we're their property, we're their livestock.
Yeah. And social media apparently is one very important method of judging what the Chinese call social scores. And it's because there's been posting on social media and virtually every aspect of their lives. Now, this data is extremely useful to governments who monitor and store information acquired freely by users who sometimes give away the most personal and intimate details of their lives and do so without charge.
True.
Now, folks, please, and most of you already know this, never say anything on social media that you would not want blasted into the universe.
Yes.
From a standpoint of communication. And I am very careful when I use social media because the last couple of times I've been approached either by bots or some sort of algorithm about sending someone money. And it was the stupidest thing in the world.
Yeah, there's a lot of spam out there as well. And I don't use social media anymore. I mean, very, very rarely. Very.
And I would say that here in the U.S., the very dark media controllers, and I'm talking about that very ugly triumvirate of Google, Facebook, and Twitter, which function rather well and have become, and Mike, please check me on this, if you will, the fourth arm of an American government: judicial, legislature, and executive, and surveillance.
Well, I don't know that I would call it a fourth branch of the American government, but there's absolutely no question that they are, in fact, one of the tools of domestic statecraft. And, you know, they're tied in, first of all, with corporations that want to sell you products and law enforcement. And unfortunately, the right to privacy, the Fourth Amendment, appears to be completely erased now. And they can just go trolling through your data without a warrant just to see if they can find something.
Well, you know, it's funny because I will confess, it's a chick thing. I do like jewelry.
Yes.
And I will look at some of the more modest priced but nice looking pieces.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, a couple of days later, I will see ads for other similar jewelry functions.
Yeah, definitely.
You know.
That. I'll tell you where that breaks down, though.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a clock up on the wall here, which is actually set to Central Time, so I can keep an eye on what I'm doing in terms of the broadcast here. And I bought it. I had to order it online. And sure enough, days later, I'm seeing all these ads for clocks. Do they really think I'm going to buy another one? Yeah.
Yeah, it's very funny. But, I see these things sort of break out, you know, sort of pop-up ads.
Yeah.
You know. And really, really kind of strange.
It is aggressive and abusive.
Yeah.
And I think it's a symptom of the fact that our economy is slowing down and we're going into a recession. Online advertising is very inexpensive compared to the more traditional versions in corporate media.
Yeah.
So they just figure we'll just blast everybody, and even if we only get a few sales, you know, we'll still be in the green.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very strange. But just please, as you see things start to pop up for you from those ads, just be aware that they've been mining your data without your consent.
Absolutely.
And that's, you know, that is where I get very annoyed.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that you should be very careful about. Okay, Claire and I are very old-fashioned. We will actually go to the physical bank to conduct business. We can check our balances online, but that's it.
Yeah.
You know, we're not set up to transfer, and we never use our smartphones for credit card purchases or anything like that. Because right now, cyber criminals are running rampant across our population, and nobody's doing anything about it.
Yeah.
It's like it's open season on the American computer user.
Where's the NSA when you really, really need them?
Well,
ignoring you. You know.
Again, we've devolved to a criminal society.
Yeah.
We have criminals in charge of the government, and they're on the side of the criminals who are out here in cyberspace because they want the internet to become more trouble to use and for people to stop using it.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Okay, and welcome back to our show here, and let's go back to the lovely Lady Claire. And what is your next story?
Well, just when you think things couldn't get more bad in the Middle East, the U.S. government has now announced more support for heroic white helmets in Syria. And they are not with the al-Assad government.
Nope.
They are almost always with controversial, militant-held areas of Syria. And we have pledged them a $5 million donation at a conference. And it was announced by Ambassador James Jeffrey, U.S. Special Envoy, to the Anti-Islamic State, IS, formerly known as ISIS Coalition, at the third conference on supporting the future of Syria and the region held in Brussels. And this $5 million will do a lot in terms of vital life-saving operations by the White Helmets and the work of the International Impartial Independent Mechanism. Oh, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And Mike, what I've got to ask you is, in signing off on this, has President Trump just completely lost his mind, or was he not privy to this decision?
Well, I'm sure that he was. I mean,
Yeah.
Again, Trump is controlled.
Yeah,
He's proven
yeah.
to be a very weak leader. He's easily manipulated.
Yep.
He's susceptible to flattery.
Yes.
And we all heard him get up on the TV and say, we're going to pull out of Syria. It's not happening.
No.
It's definitely not happening.
And the Syrian government has been lambasting the evacuation of white helmets as criminals. And if you look on the net, probably more with Bing.com rather than Google, you will find this leitmotif of white helmets, lousy, white helmets, lousy, white helmets, lousy.
Well, there was actually a video basically saying that they're al-Nusra. They just put on the white helmets and call themselves by a new name and engage in these propaganda operations.
Yeah.
I mean, they were right in the middle of that so-called gas attack in Duma, which has now been completely discredited.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And they were there with their video cameras. They were in the hospital, just pouring water all over the kids and saying, they're suffering from chemical weapons. No gloves, no protective gear.
Yeah.
If there'd really been sarin in use there.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a hoax. It's a fraud. It's another Saddam's nuclear weapon all over again.
Yeah.
And that's what the white helmets are doing. And the fact that the United States government wants to give them an additional $5 million is telling me that there's going to be another false flag so the U.S. can justify re-escalating, going back on in to Syria, because they don't want to admit they've lost there. Because if they lose in Syria, if they're seen as losing in Syria, the wheels come off the whole war agenda. Same thing with Afghanistan. The United States is going to pour money and your children into Afghanistan just so that they can say, we haven't lost.
And Mike, if you were an odds maker, when would you bet that we're going to be seeing a reinstitution of the draft?
I think we'll see a reinstitution of the draft. Probably we're going to have to see the war escalate to the point where we're actually talking about either marching into Venezuela from Colombia and the sea, or we get into a dust-up with Russia and China. But I'm seeing the United States military really go the route of the whiz-bang, high technology. We can win the war from the air, which of course is a lie. We learned that one in Vietnam.
Or should have.
And, all these robots, like the new drone ships they're talking about, and autonomous drones that are going to go in and do the killing for them.
Yeah.
And I don't like the killing part of it, but if they're going to send in a robot in place of one of our kids, I'm kind of okay with that.
Yeah, yeah. And what I'm concerned about are the troops which have been left in Syria going to be used as sacrificial lambs for that false flag?
Could very well be.
Yeah.
But have you noticed every time there's one of these false flags, it's always women and children to magnify the shock value. If there was a false flag attack against the troops in Syria, I think a large part of the American public would say, well, it serves them right. They weren't supposed to be there anymore.
Yeah. I mean,
in fact, they could turn around and blame Trump for that. Say, why were they there to get blown up? Trump said he was bringing them home.
And in another article I saw today in RT.com, Russia Today, and by the way, if you haven't maybe taken a look at some of these alternative websites that Mike and I work with, even if you don't like the people or agree with them, I think it's important for all of us to know what people are thinking. And these English language translations from other countries do that.
Yes.
Now, what appeared in Russia Today, apparently white helmets and militants may be preparing for a false flag chemical attack in Syria.
Gee, I hate being right all the time.
How does it feel to have the myth of Sisyphus on your head?
I think you mean the curse of Cassandra.
Okay, yes. All right. Okay. And I know that you've covered this.
Yes.
Okay. We do have some more here.
We have to figure out a new way to format this.
Yes. Yes, yes. Yeah. Okay. All righty.
So, all righty.
What you have some talking points up there.
Well,
you'd like to
okay, here we go.
Yes.
Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah,
it wasn't my talking points, but go for it.
Apparently, wastewater treatment plants spread antibiotic resistance. This is really nasty. The products of wastewater treatment have been found to contain trace amounts of antibiotic-resistant DNA. This is really bad because these products are often reintroduced into the environment and water supply, potentially resulting in the spread of antibiotic resistance. And as such, researchers at USC, Viterbi School of Engineering have been studying this. And, this is potentially very harmful stuff. And if dangerous genes get into the wastewater treatment, that's going to be pretty terrible, Mike.
Well, of course, there's been a big problem because all of the wastewater treatment plants were designed to basically take what comes out of your bathroom, clean it up, filter it out, and recycle it back to your kitchen faucet. But these systems were all designed at a time where that's all they had to deal with. Since then, the United States has become one of the most medicated populations on Earth. Plus, we've had these medications go through our system and into the wastewater treatment plant. They come on back out elsewhere. We're actually seeing effects in ocean fish from runoff from all of these medications that are out there. And I'm not surprised that we're seeing the snippets of DNA floating around as well. These wastewater plants are not designed to handle any of this stuff. They're not designed to filter out these chemicals. They're not designed to filter out these DNA snippets, prions, I think they are.
And many of them are almost crumbling because there's been no money to restore the infrastructure to where it should be.
Well, in the case of the wastewater management, it can't be just restored. It has to be overhauled. Because, again, it's spreading this stuff everywhere, and people are being exposed to prescription medications that are completely inappropriate for them. In fact, we had an article that was on the website today just talking about the unknown source of disease, and it says it's the exposure to all these chemicals. And the corporations producing these chemicals have got the clout to prevent the corporate media from talking about it. And so environmental, when you talk about allergies, the discussion is always about dust and pollen and stuff like that. There are other things that can trigger an allergic reaction, including in commercial products and so forth. But, we are just surrounded in this real-life matrix here.
We have some friends from choir.
Call me Neo.
We have some friends from choir with a beautiful 2-year-old. And they seem to be down with a bug all the time. And I have to wonder if it's what they're eating or if there are environmental issues that they're dealing with, because they're younger, healthy people. They shouldn't have to be dealing with this.
Well, it's not just him. There are several of the singers in our choir who always seem to be dealing with some kind of a minor medical issue. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. I was kind of wondering what happened to you. What's on your mind today?
I have a couple things, but Mike, did you talk about the border agency saying Trump, there hasn't been one part of the new wall at all built?
I was just looking at that article. I hadn't talked about it yet, but apparently,
What do you make? Con Mander in chief, just like Obama, Bush, the Clintons. I mean, how can anybody justify this dude now? I mean,
it's hard. I've got to tell you.
I mean, but Mike,
Well, this reminds me of back in 1996 when Congress passed a bill, was signed by the president, was supposed to fund 700 miles of border fence, and only 30 miles got built. And there was never an explanation for where that money went or why somebody pulled the plug on the project.
So
then what did he... Oh, sorry. What did he do then? Like, if he just vetoed this thing, but that doesn't mean anything. If nothing's been built, nothing's been started.
Well, hang on.
Right?
Dustin, you've got the cart before the horse here, because Trump's national emergency declaration is the step to get the money to build his wall. Up until now, he hasn't had the money to build the wall. He's had enough money to get some prototypes built, those little demonstration things, but he hasn't had the large amount of money to actually construct the wall. Now, I think probably a lot of people sort of assumed that at least some of the wall was being built, or that some of the existing wall, which is in bad shape, was being repaired. But I was looking at this article where Trump's border agent is saying, no, nothing's been done. I don't know why Trump is bothering with a campaign. If he does not deliver on immigration, he's a one-term president, because he's dropped the ball on pretty much everything else.
Yeah, I would agree.
And so we're left with zero then again. Like, we're left with nothing again.
Don't worry. We got a nice supply of illegal immigrants to make fun of.
Ouch.
But, Mike, on that shooting in New Zealand, John Podesta, did you hear about he was supposedly in New Zealand a couple of days ago?
No.
Now, that's interesting.
Right? And also that shooter was, from what I read, was in Pakistan, and basically said it was either for vacation or something. I don't know if this guy's SAS or a third-party but he said that people were nice there and kind. Does that sound like a shooter to you? Why would you go to Pakistan if you don't like these people? Right?
Well, again, in his manifesto, he was saying this one person was very influential, and she's a black lady, and they're describing this manifesto as anti-immigration, racist. In one article, they said it was eco-fascist. So everybody is trying to exploit this incident for their own agenda.
Yeah.
But as I was mentioning to an earlier caller, this guy is from Australia, and New Zealand has got very strict gun laws. How did this guy get these firearms? That's what I want to know.
That's a really good question.
Yeah,
I mean, they have to trace back to somewhere.
Don't the New Zealand airports have security? Of course they do. You and I have been there.
Yes.
Yeah, he's not going to. This thing really is starting to feel more and more like another staged event. And again, it's terrible to think that we live with a government that's perfectly happy to see, 40, 50, 60 people get killed, to make a political point, whether it's down in Christchurch or over at Las Vegas.
And Mike, I'm going to jump again to Boeing.
Okay.
You mentioned there was a whole bunch of orders. They had a back order of 5,000.
Yes.
For that plane. That's nuts. So this is a debacle for them. They're going to have to lay off people, most likely, because if a lot of orders get canceled at this point.
Well, I think everybody's in a holding pattern to basically get the results from the readout from the flight data recorder, and my read of the situation is that it's probably that stall sensor, the stall warning sensor, because there had been a comment about that producing erroneous data back in November during the Indonesian crash. And I would have assumed that Boeing would have said, please install the new and improved stall sensor warning. It could also be a software issue. If it is something that can be fixed very quickly, then Boeing will survive this crisis.
But if not?
If not, yes, then $600 billion worth of orders is going to get canceled.
Yeah.
Isn't that messed up? You're relying on a Windows 10 patch to fix something. I mean, my God,
Well,
it's sad, right?
It really is. Again, there's a Michael Crichton book called Airframe. It'll never be made into a movie. And toward the end of his life, Michael Crichton was writing books which he thought would stimulate some needed thought in the reader. One of them, of course, was State of Fear, which was about the global warming hoax. Airframe is about the aircraft manufacturing, testing, and it's full of lots of little insights, because one thing Crichton always did in all of his books, he did his research, and he really did fill his books with a lot of good information. But, modern passenger aircraft, or any aircraft, they're the most complex manufactured items of all. And as careful as they are, maybe somebody cut corners on the software. But after that first crash, they should have been looking a little bit more closely. We had that report where 2 other pilots have now come forward saying they were having problems with this system, and why nothing was done there, because it's all the same behavior. They're trying to take off, and then all of a sudden the autopilot slams the engines forward, which if they're not already maximum speed, and noses the aircraft down.
Augers down, right?
Yeah. Which is what you would do if you were on the edge of a stall. And the controllers in the towers at both Indonesia and this last one were saying that the aircraft were traveling at very dangerously high speeds outside the normal envelope. So, yeah, there was some...
But there was more than these couple pilots, because there was supposedly a message board where people who were flying this plane was posting messages to this message board saying, like, they had this plane is weird and it's acting weird, and it was more than a few pilots, you know. From what I heard from a woman who was who worked for Boeing, I watched her interview.
Okay, Dustin.
There was a message. Yeah.
Dustin, stay on the line. We got to take a break for commercials. I want to hear the rest of the story about this message board. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program on this Pauhana Friday. We're still talking with Dustin in New Jersey. And to back up a little bit, you were telling us that there was some kind of a message board for air travelers, I guess, where people were putting up these posts saying that there was something just weird about the way the plane flew.
Yeah, it was almost like either chat room for pilots, but it's not. I don't think it was an official, message board Boeing would have.
Yes.
But I'm gonna have to watch the interview again. But what this woman says, it was like just a chat room or message board for pilots to talk to each other, like probably around the world.
Yes.
And there's this plane was acting just strange. It was just more than the two pilots complaining about it here and there. It was more going on than it's all about money, Mike. Like that's what, because it took Trump a day to really. I mean, as soon as an Ethiopian plane, they should have been grounded all around. I mean, Canada even was slow.
Oh, everybody was grounding them, and then the FAA came on out and said, no, this is an okay airplane, trying to protect Boeing's profits. But then finally, Trump did the one thing so far that I'm applauding him for, and he signed that executive order. And so it looks like there's an issue with that stall indicator, the stall warning sensor. There may be a software issue on top of it. And the third problem in the cascade was that the flight crews for the 737 MAX were not being told about the changes made to the stall system and how it would grab the airplane away from you if it thought it was stalling. And so that was a training issue. And I guess the assumption was they're type certified for the 737, shouldn't be a problem for the 737 MAX. But no, it's not a problem. And that's why type certification exists, to make sure you know everything there is to know about that exact piece of hardware you are sitting in. Anyway, listen, Dustin, we're going to let you go. We've got time enough for one more phone call from Keith Rogers. And Keith, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I was just going to make a fast comment. Hello to Claire there, too. I was watching a video about 2 days ago. I forget the name of it, but it was this pilot was talking. He says the problem with airplanes today is that the physical side has been removed. He says you don't realize that in these big jets and stuff, when they control the flaps and stuff, they're all done by computers. There's no cableage that goes back and forth across the plane like the older planes.
Yes.
So he says, even if you tried to reboot the computer, to do that, you'd have to kill the entire airplane because everything's controlled off servos, to where if you do depress your brake pedal and it wants so many millivolts back to a certain servo, it's all controlled by the computer.
Well, so you're saying okay, Keith, where you're erring is you're saying the computer. Modern aircraft, there are dozens and dozens of computers, and the digital fly-by-wire systems that go from the control yoke to the control surfaces, they may send sensory information to the computer, and the computer can send its information back to the sensors. But there, according to an email I got from a pilot, there is in fact an override switch. where it would simply go to the control surfaces are going to do what you do to the yoke. Anyway, listen, got to let you go. There's the music. Time for us to get out of here. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of useful things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with other people around. Use postal mail, email, private conversation. Forget about social media. It's just been turned into this gulag. They're completely worthless unless you're into funny kitten videos. So please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. It is really, really tight this month. So have a great weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.